Just taking a look at what happened yesterday at the Madlanga Commission, where an SAPS Organised Crime Unit detective, only identified as Witness A, gave his evidence yesterday at the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry. Now, he named and linked multiple murder accused, the Katiso Molefe, who is currently out on 400,000 Rand bail, to cell phone communication associated with his co-accused in the murder of Vereeniging engineer Armand Swart last year. Now, the QTech engineering company employee was shot and killed in a hail of bullets while inside his vehicle outside his workplace in Vereeniging. Witness A also gave a detailed testimony on how organized crime head Major General Richard Shibiri allegedly attempted to bait or influence the investigating team probing the murder of Armand Swart into taking a bribe. So to talk to us more about the extent of infiltration of the criminal cartels in South Africa, we're joined virtually by Chad Thomas, a criminal intelligence specialist. Chad, thanks so much for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
A very good morning to you and to the viewers.
Now, Chad, yesterday, Witness A named and linked Katiso Molefe to one of the suspect's cell phones communication. And Molefe is, of course, currently out on 400,000 Rand bail. And he's been accused of orchestrating a series of contract killings alongside his co-accused. And some of those killings include that of DJ Somebody and Armand Swart. Now, this has further revealed the extent of alleged criminal cartels in our country. But how bad is the situation as far as you've been able to establish?
Look, the criminal infiltration of police forces around the world is nothing new. If one goes to New York City in the 1970s, it was regarded as the most corrupt police force in the world. And it took one man to bring down that corruption and turn around the NYPD. And the NYPD is now regarded as one of the most successful and honest police forces in the world. Obviously, where you've got people in power, there's going to be people that want to try somehow influence or compromise those people. What came out of yesterday's testimony by Witness A was frankly frightening, because we're now hearing more names of more police officers who are supposedly or purportedly linked to the underworld, and how the underworld has been able to compromise very senior members, and how this then trickles down to the junior members, and how junior members are influenced to try not to continue with their work, be it through outright bribes or through intimidation. And this is why what came out in July 6's presser with Vereeniging was so interesting, because we've always known that to a certain extent there are certain compromised members and there has been criminal infiltration of the South African Police Service, but we didn't know it was to this extent. We suspected it was, but we never realized that it was to this extent. But what stands out for me is that we've still, despite the high rates of crime in this country, we've still been able to have police officers continue with their work unabated, despite the threats, despite the interference, and we haven't reached that mafia state yet. And it's very interesting, the dynamic that's coming out of the Madlanga Commission, because now we're hearing from actual members on the ground. We're not hearing from generals. We're hearing from actual operational junior members, how they get influenced, or the attempt to influence them comes from the very top.
Chad, you say we haven't reached a mafia state yet. So what would a mafia state look like? Because if you listen to the testimony that we've heard so far and just how embedded these cartels are, it begs the question, to what level have they infiltrated the police and also other parts of the criminal justice system? But not just that, also those in the economic sphere and in the political sphere.
It's a frightening situation when one sees the amount of murder for hires that take place in South Africa, the high rate of kidnap for ransom, cash in transit heist, ATM bombings, extortion networks that are operating under the cover of so-called business forums. But the fact remains is we've seen people held to account. What was frightening with the Babita case, for example, is that we only saw trigger men held to account. With AKA, we see trigger men being prosecuted. But with the DJ Somebody, the Armand Swart and other related cases, we're now seeing the facilitators and maybe even the top tier leadership being prosecuted in these matters. It seems to be a complete turnaround. Before, we saw the bottom rung of the criminal enterprise being held to account, and for these guys, they were either influenced not to turn witness and to give up those that had hired them through the fact that their families would be looked after while they were inside, or that their families would be harmed if they decided to speak. But now suddenly, through the use of technology and through dedicated police officers who are using old-fashioned detective-type skills coupled with technology, we're now seeing this dynamic of the top-tier leadership also being prosecuted. So that's a turning point for us in South Africa. The fact that we've got Mexicans operating on our soil, the fact that we've got syndicates that are kidnapping South African nationals that originated out of Maputo shows that we do have a transnational crime problem. There are mafias operating, but the mafia hasn't taken control simply because we still have a very, very, very independent media that will report fiercely on what is happening. We have police officers that, despite the interference from senior members, are still willing to do their work. And our democracy is successful. We went through a successful national election cycle last year. We're about to enter into a local election cycle. And it just shows that South Africans are exceptionally resolute, and we aren't prepared to allow ourselves to fall into a mafia state type situation.
So what exactly are we dealing with here, Chad, from your experience? Are we just dealing with loose criminal syndicates who are in part opportunistic, or are we dealing with, highly organized crime cartels with clearly specified hierarchies? What exactly are we dealing with?
It's both. You have a lot of opportunistic criminals that take a chance because they see people getting away with very serious crime in South Africa. We see copycat syndicates emerging, especially in the kidnap for ransom space. We see copycat syndicates emerging in the murder for hire space as well. It's very easy to hire in Kabis now. This is of concern. And yes, we do have organized crime on steroids in South Africa, which is exceptionally well organized. We have top-tier leadership, we have middle-tier leadership, we have the soldiers at the bottom, we have the enablers who help them launder the monies. And what we're seeing, which is quite unique to the South African dynamic, is a crossover between legitimate business and illegitimate business, where you're seeing guys that are involved in the illicit trade are also involved in tenders, are also involved in government business. And they're using the tactics that they would use in the underworld to secure these tenders in the overt economy. And that is troubling, because if that goes unchecked, we will slide very fast into a mafia state. But we're nowhere near that as yet.
So what is the modus operandi for capturing those within the criminal justice system and politicians?
Comes down to money. South Africa as a society has an issue with the flashy things in life. It's a very strange aspect of what we're seeing emerging. And it could be because of the massive disparity between the haves and the have-nots. It could still be reminiscent of what we saw during apartheid, where a minority had control over the riches of this land. But it's something that needs to change. You've got too many of the youth aspiring to be criminals because they see the criminals driving the fancy cars, building the flashy houses, spending a lot of money at the nightclubs and in the taverns. And they don't see much hope in, like today, they start writing their matric. But how many of those matriculants will be able to study further? We've got one of the highest rates of unemployment in the world, specifically amongst our youth. And this creates an opportunity for people to become engaged in criminality. And the sad thing is, you've got a small-time criminal that gets caught, goes to prison awaiting trial because he can't afford bail, and that's literally his new university. He goes into a predatory environment and he starts working his way up the ranks. So when he leaves prison, having been a minor opportunistic criminal, he's now a career criminal. That's his life.
So the Madlanga Commission heard yesterday that organized crime head Major General Richard Shibiri allegedly attempted to bait or influence the investigation team that were probing the murder of Vereeniging engineer Armand Swart. So here you are, and you touched on this earlier, Chad, but it's scary to think, how potentially police officers are lured into this, because if your boss is now offering you the bribe, I mean, how do you respond to that as a police officer, a junior police officer at that?
Well, it may be career limiting, it may be career ending. If you don't join points officers, they're going to try something to work you out. It's such a sad indictment of where we find ourselves as a country, and it's sad to think that our law enforcement officers are being exposed to this, because one must remember that a great majority of our police officers are there to be police officers. They do want to make a difference. They are driven by their community, and they're driven by wanting to see a change. And if we never had those police officers, make no mistake, our country would be in a shambles. We would be a failed state, and we would have been fully captured by criminal syndicates. But it's somewhat confusing for the public at large, because you see people getting tenders who are also involved in the underworld, and these same people getting tenders are involved with the most senior ranking of the police. Look at Vusikat Matlala getting a tender for the SAPS wellness contract, 360 million. He's responsible to ensure that our police officers are well enough to be able to serve. He's there to ensure that if they need to be boarded, that they go through the correct processes. If you report as a trainee, he's meant to give a medical certificate, yet he had zero infrastructure to do this. How involved do you have to be that you involve yourself in a corrupt tender that involves the highest law enforcement agency in the land, the South African Police Service?
And these are the questions that so many South Africans are grappling with right now. And it's mind-boggling, trying to piece all of the evidence that we are hearing now together and looking at just how far it goes up. And it's easy to become fatalistic as a nation at this point, but perhaps worth looking at how do we compare when it comes to the infiltration of these criminal syndicates in our criminal justice system and beyond. How do we compare to other countries, perhaps some on the African continent and elsewhere?
We don't compare very well at all, considering our incredible infrastructure, our amazing resources, and our access to human capital. We sit in the top 5 most violent criminal societies in the world in terms of violent crime. We share that terrible distinction with countries like Haiti, which has no administration, and Afghanistan, which has been at war for as long as living memory. It's a frightening dynamic. We rank number 1 in Africa for kidnap for ransom. We rank number 6 in the world for kidnap for ransom. We are very similar to where we saw Colombia and Mexican City in the late 90s, early 2000s. We've got countries that are at war that are losing less people in day-to-day conflicts, and we are losing in murders. You look at the Cape Flats. The Cape Flats have become a war zone. In one night over this past weekend, 7 people were killed in one shooting. It's horrific. You hear a mass shooting in America, 2 people are killed. It makes international news. In South Africa, 2 people doesn't count as a mass killing anymore. We report when there's 7 people that are being killed. It's very sad to see how this is somehow infiltrated our entire society. But what's important to remember is we are a resilient society. We as South Africans are not going to stand for this. And if we had been fully captured, if we were a mafia state, we wouldn't have the Madlanga Commission Inquiry. We wouldn't have the ad hoc committee in Parliament. We wouldn't see Katiso Molefe and Vusikat Matlala being charged. We wouldn't see generals suspended, ministers placed on leave. And that should be very encouraging for us as a nation. It shows that our system is still working and we are going to hold people to account.
But if we are to fix this country, Chad, we have to start by fixing the police. And from what we are hearing right now, the rot runs really deep in the South African police service. So how do we start fixing that?
There's no short-term solution. We have to look from the medium to long term in terms of policy changes. We can't lie to our fellow countrymen by saying there's 10,000 new boots on the ground and not talk about the natural attrition of 10,000 people that have retired that year or have resigned from the police because they're disillusioned. We can't have 10,000 guys straight out of police college and we don't have 10,000 people to replace our detectives. The most important aspect of policing is to be able to hold those to account and to work together with the prosecutors. prosecutors. It doesn't matter that Operation Chanela arrested 600,000 people and it was a turnstile. They went into the cells, they came straight out because their matters weren't enrolled. There weren't prosecutors that were prepared to take on those cases because there wasn't a prospect of a successful prosecution. Those are the major issues we're dealing with in South Africa. The Hawks have never been more than half capacitated. Imagine we could double the capacity of the Hawks, which should be budgeted for. They've only got 50% of the required manpower. It doesn't make sense that if we want to solve crime and we want to stop criminals from becoming career criminals, that we don't have the detective services. But it's a knock-on effect, because once we start solving those crimes, we're not going to have enough prosecutors, we're not going to have enough courtrooms, not going to have enough court days, not going to have enough presiding officers, and worst of all, where are we going to put these criminals, because our prisons are already sitting at 156,000 people.
And I think you've actually captured the problem rather well there, Chad. Thank you so much. That's all we have time for this morning. Chad Thomas, a criminal intelligence specialist, talking to us about the extent of criminal cartels in South Africa. And of course, what came out of Witness A's evidence at the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry yesterday. And that continues. The ad hoc committee resumes today. So much still to come. And of course, we'll keep bringing you analysis on what we hear.